According to a survey that we all took, everyone in this room today gets their news from one of 6 media conglomerates. And to those of you who told me that you don't read the news, well, you're not special, because everything else that you read, watch, or listen to is likely to come from those same 6 sources. And I want to say that I know that all of us like to think of ourselves as informed. We like to think that we have a wide variety of sources and that we get the full perspective. But there's a misconception there. Because that same survey we took showed me that none of us know where our media actually comes from. We had no idea that there are only 6 conglomerates that control a majority of American media. Now that said, the purpose of this speech is to give you a better understanding of the current state of the media industry, and in the hopes that you'll get a better understanding of where your media comes from and perhaps make better choices based off of that knowledge. So I'm going to do that by first going through exactly how we got to the current state of things, then going over where we are as of now, and then going over the direct factual implications that you can observe yourself as an individual. So let's start at the beginning, where mass media started, at the end of World War II in 1948. In 1948, 80% of all media and closer to 100% of all news sources was independently owned and operated. That is to say, their market share of the entire American media market was about 3 to 5%, no bigger than that. And even as the economy shifted from wartime to peacetime and the economy reached heights no one ever expected it to reach, even after 30 years of companies buying one another out, taking one another over, and merging, their market shares remained remarkably the same, close to 3 and 5%. But in the 80s, something changed. Because in the 80s, specifically 1987, that original figure completely reversed, and close to 80% of all media had become concentrated within the hands of only 20 companies, and 15 years later, that number became 6. So something significant happened. And it wasn't an accident. We can point to 3 specific moments in time that tell us how this happened. So the first was under the Reagan administration. There was a general relaxation of regulation over the media industry, specifically one rule that was abandoned. Companies could now own more than one media outlet. That is to say, they used to only be able to own a newspaper or a radio station. Now they could own multiple. They could own as many outlets as they wanted. The second occurred under the Clinton administration with the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which said that companies could own up to a 35% market share within any of their outlets. Basically, they could have a 35% aggregate market share. And the final happened in 2002 when a US federal court judge ruled in favor of Viacom, one of our conglomerates, that they could own up to any amount of the market share in the media industry that they wanted. So that sort of sets the foundations of how we got to where we are. But where are we? Well, today, 6 media conglomerates control over 90% of all the media that we see every day. And those companies include News Corp, Sony, Disney, Viacom, Time Warner, and CBS. Now, of these companies, there are 232 media executives who get final say on what those media companies produce for about 277 million Americans. To break that down a little bit, that's one person, one media executive for every 850,000 Americans, or one person for every population the size of San Francisco. So that really gives you an idea of the extent in terms of numbers. But what about money? Well, in 2010, their overall net revenue, just those 6 companies, was over $276 billion. Now that is larger than the GDP of Finland and 5 times larger than the government bailout of GM. So they have a lot of money. But what does that mean for you, the individual? Well, most of us will notice it significantly if we live in a major metropolitan area. You see, these 6 companies each have monopolies in the 11 most populous countries, in 11 most populous cities within the United States. And yes, Phoenix is one of those cities, which means that a majority of the media that we look at every day, specifically locally produced media, comes from only one source. Now, this also means that we're not likely to be represented, meaning there are only 232 media executives. As Americans, we don't see ourselves represented clearly on television. According to a study done by the American Watchdog Association, which regulates the media industry in the United States, of all the commentators and anchors on television, approximately 92% of them were white, 85% of them were male, and 75% of them were Republican. And according to the U.S. Census Bureau, that is not representative of the United States population in any way. And the final point that I want to touch on is something that we don't think about a lot as owned by corporations, and that is the internet. We like to think of it as a place open for small business, creativity, and it is. But it's important to remember where that content comes from. For every 52 minutes that we spend on the internet, for every 60 minutes we spend on the internet, we spend about 52 minutes of that looking at content derived from only 20 companies, the top 6 of which are our major conglomerates. So it really gives you an idea of the extent that these companies have in mingling within our lives. So I really think that by understanding where this all came from, where we are, and the direct factual implications for you, we can start to look at the media industry for what it actually is. And it is an industry owned by 6 companies. 6 companies that control 90% of the media. Our books, our television, our music, all of it comes from them. And it has a profound influence on how we think, how we make choices, and what we choose to pay attention to. And I think if we take that into account, and we make sure that we know exactly where all of those materials come from, we can make better choices, we can think more clearly, and look at the world with a greater clarity than we would otherwise.